This presentation will cover networking best practices for the Greenlight Career Advancement Program. So in my previous video on LinkedIn, I covered how to find people to network with. Well, that goes hand in hand in the Greenlight program with the networking activities. I ended that LinkedIn video saying, take your contacts, take that relationship offline. What that means is you want to look for ways to connect with that person, whether it's over the phone, over a Zoom call, or in person, such as a coffee chat, uh, happy hour, a lunch. We want you to find those networking contacts and then build a relationship. So we'll talk about best practices for networking. To set the context, here's a quote from a recruiter partner that gave us some feedback about networking. So this recruiter's feedback would be for those candidates that may not have as much industry experience. Those candidates could share some prep or research they've done to get smart on the industry, such as through networking chats, and two, express why they're interested and passionate in the industry. The recruiters thought in multiple cases the candidates did a pretty good job with this. However, as an organization focused specifically on healthcare, that recruiter would want to know why the candidate has a really good, strong answer as to why healthcare, especially if it's not something that's in their background, like they're making a pivot into it. The key takeaway here is that networking is a great way to crowdsource career insights from folks who've already done that role, worked in that company, worked in that industry, learn for those insiders how to answer that question. So this video's agenda on networking best practices. We'll cover the basics, the best practices, and then also end with some goal setting around your networking and planning out your networking strategy for the summer before campus recruitment if you're going to participate in it, or if you're job searching currently, how to start your networking plan. So a lot of the to-dos to get up to speed on networking is from our chapter in our ebook, the CBC Career Guide. So this ebook is linked here. This is what the um, cover page looks like with the ebook. You're going to want to go to page 22 in the ebook, and that's where the networking chapter begins. Optional, but highly, highly recommended is Greenlight participants are highly encouraged to read the book, The 20-Minute Networking Meeting. We have many copies of this book available in the CBCC library, in the office. It's a local author in Minnesota, and so it's a cheap or widely available book at local libraries, and it's pretty inexpensive, and the audiobook as well. Online. But back to the ebook. So the basics of what's covered in that are why should you network, which I'll briefly touch on here in a moment. Knowing yourself, so you know what you're going to be talking about in networking meetings. Um, Comments on three different types of networking experiences. So formal networking, informational interviews, career fairs, and conferences. For the majority of our best practices, we really focus on informational interviews. However, if you're going to be attending one of the affinity fairs, like the MBA Vets Conference, the Reaching Out MBA Conference, the National Black MBA Conference, Prospanica Conference, or any other local or regional career fair, career conference, industry conference. We have other tips on that, but a lot of those won't be shared on these videos, but they'd be good things to talk directly with your coach about. Also in the ebook, there's positioning statements, lots of samples that you can see examples for different formats, length of time. For example, a tell me about yourself versus an elevator pitch versus a email prompt. And then some do's and don'ts specifically for international students or alums needing work authorization. There's always a couple of tips on those throughout the ebook, but especially for networking. Okay, so here is the basically the table of contents of the 20-Minute Networking Meeting book by Nathan Perez and Marcia Ballinger. So this book is widely used, and it is a pretty short read. It's about 200 pages. It's only about a 3.25 hour listen on audiobook. Um, it's a pretty easy to digest book, and it's got lots of great appendix tools, lots of examples, lots of things that you can copy from the book itself. So this is a really helpful tool. Um, and I would recommend everyone read this book. Oh, before I go on to the value of networking, just looking at some of these appendix items here, I think it's important that you can utilize all these appendix items. So if you are reading the book, be sure to look through the appendix as well, because it's really helpful tools. Okay, so the value of networking. Keep in mind that networking is the #1 way to get a job. Referrals are the #1 source of all external hires. It's estimated that up to 70 to 80% of job seekers find their next opportunity via networking. These statistics are so much better than the apply and cross your fingers and hope for those online job applications or applying without networking. You still will need to apply, so that's still part of the process. But networking and applying with a referral is so much more effective than applying on your own. So when I think of networking and the purpose and outcomes of informational interviews, networking, it's the 1A and the 1B in my mind. It's information and relationship building. So what do I mean by information? You can get lots of information. Is this the right fit? Is the manager good for you? Is this a good corporate culture? So lots of things you'll be curious about. But it can also be super helpful for tailoring your application. When I applied for the job I currently have, after doing an informational interview, I drastically changed my cover letter to add in information that I knew would be interesting to the hiring manager. So it can really help with tailoring your bullet points and your cover letter for what the job really is looking for. Relationships, obviously, they're good for referrals, but they can also be references that you list in an application or in a cover letter, which is often really important in campus recruitment. And it can help you be in mind for future opportunities. Even if the informational interview, there's not a current role that's a fit for you, it can be help you be top of mind the next time a similar role opens up. So again, there's 3 types of networking that we mainly talk about: formal networking events, career fairs. But the main thing we'll talk about is #2, the informational interviews. So briefly on the types we won't cover a lot in this video, there's different types of events. So for the Carlson Business Career Center, the biggest event for campus recruitment for MBAs and for students that would be going for analytics roles, so there's a separate analytics reception, is these corporate receptions. There's a corporate reception in the fall. So in 2024, it'll be on the 11th of September. It's a Wednesday evening. It's over at McNamara, and we'll have a prep session for that. But that kicks off the Carlson fall recruitment season. But there's other types of networking events that happen throughout the year. So clubs will put on events. There'll be speakers and different competitions. There'll be events outside of Carlson that happen throughout the business community here in Minnesota, such as Twin City Startup Week, Minnesota Cup. And then I mentioned some national affinity fairs, but looking for conferences, case competition, affinity fairs like National Black MBA, MBA vets, etc. Those are events that may apply to you, may not, but those are things that are good to talk with your coach about to see if there's a national recruitment event that would be good for you to sign up for. Okay, but for the main purpose of networking presentation, we talk mainly about the networking meeting, but there's also the pre and the post. So the networking meeting itself in this image is really number 4. And that's a lot about what the 20-minute networking meeting book covers, but it does cover steps 1 through 6 as well. So finding a contact, requesting a meeting, preparing for that meeting, executing the meeting, the follow-up, and the staying in touch. And I'll go into more details about all 6 of these. But for each of the 6 steps, I do want you to know that we do have resources that correspond to each of these. So for identifying contacts, there's things like using LinkedIn, our business development team, requesting a meeting, there's sample messages in our ebook, or you could leverage ChatGPT to write an introductory meeting request. Preparing for the meeting, there's checklists in these slides, as well as the 20-minute networking meeting book has tips for preparing for a networking meeting. We highly recommend following the 20-minute networking meeting structure. However, there is one other book that I highly recommend. So I would say that the 20-minute networking meeting is a very formal approach. It's very structured. It's very straightforward and easy to use. And I'll go into more details about what that structure is. But there's a second book that I also highly like and highly recommend. It's called The 2-Hour Job Search. Now, that book is more comprehensive because it talks about company research and how to identify contacts and reach out to them. But the final part of the 3 parts in that book, the 2-Hour Job Search, is about running a networking meeting, and that's using the Tiara framework. So each letter in the Tiara acronym stands for a technique and a tactic to use in running a networking meeting. I'd say it's a little more casual, but it also seems highly effective. And so that's the second most commonly recommended model for networking that I recommend. But back to the 6-step process and the resources here. So following up, there are sample thank yous in the ebook. And then staying in touch. So staying in touch is one of the hardest things. And I do have a slide about that, but one of the resources I recommend around that is this Rule of 50 episode. It's a Career Tools podcast episode. I think it's kind of old now. It's, I think, recorded first in 2009. But the concept of staying in touch with people once a week, so 50 weeks in a year, I think is a really good tactical way to think about how to stay in touch and keep your network warm. Okay, so this slide here and this outline here highlights and lists the 20-minute networking meeting template. And so you can see the 5 stages of that meeting framework, the amount of time, and then what those notes or objectives are for each stage. So first, summary of the book. And again, I think reading the whole book is great for you to do. But quickly, as you think about this book, what we're talking about in the first stage is making a great first impression. And so you set the agenda is one of the most important things. It's your meeting, you called it, you run it. That's about a 2 to 3 minute step. The second step is only about a minute, but it's really to give that high level overview of tell me about yourself, your pitch, your introduction. It's really a quick way to structure any information they need to know about you, because the rest of the time you really want to be hearing from them. So the majority of the 20 minutes is in what's called the Great Discussion. And this is a 12 to 15-minute portion of the meeting. So you shouldn't be asking questions about things you can easily find out or research in advance. In the book, it says 5 questions that it recommends you ask. For our purposes, I recommend just 4 of the 5. And I'll go over the 5th one at the end to say why I don't recommend asking that one. But so they recommend using 3 questions that are observation plus related questions. So structuring it like, I noticed on your website, or I read a press article about your business, and then a related question. So 3 questions like that. So do a bit of research, formulate an observation, ask a related question. The 4th question is to ask for other contacts. Based on our conversation today, Who else might you recommend that I talk to next? Now, the fifth question is, how might I be of service or help for you? And why I leave that out is one, is it can be very awkward to ask, how might I help you? And second, in the other book that I referenced, The 2-Hour Job Search, that author, Steve Dalton, would say that by offering help, now you're taking from something of a gift of time in a 20-minute networking meeting to now you're putting a price on that or putting a value on that by saying, well, you helped me to this amount. Now, can I help you to that amount? And instead of making it a way that they've offered to help out of their own good nature, now you're making it more of a transaction. Um, he has a much more full articulation of that argument, but I agree with that concept. I would not offer help right away. I mean, maybe there's some natural ways that you can help and it naturally comes up in conversation, but I wouldn't bring that up out of the blue as to ask for the help. So that's one part where I disagree with the 20-minute networking meeting. Okay, then landing the plane, a good, succinct wrap up. As Coach Bridget would say, no Minnesota goodbye. We try to wrap this up and move on. So review the actions, expressing gratitude, and then following up, sending a thank you within 48 hours, but also tracking and the ongoing conversation of any follow-ups. So in that meeting, what are the characteristics that you want to demonstrate? These are the 6 characteristics you really want to demonstrate in here. So things like strong communication, positivity, strategic thinking, being planful and organized, generous and expressing gratitude, and following through. These 6 things, if you demonstrate these in a networking meeting, even if it's not the right opportunity for you, they may feel that while you wouldn't fit at their company or in this role, they wouldn't have any problem recommending you to someone else in their network. Okay, so following up and staying in touch. Some of the more confusing or frequently asked questions I get as a coach. So after you've done that initial conversation, how do you keep this person as part of your network? So thinking about, I did the initial outreach, had that initial meeting, and then a lot of time may pass before a role opens up or fall recruitment starts, or I'm graduating and eligible to start a new role, or paying back the tuition benefit of my company. So a long time may pass before that contact may be useful for you. And so here are 6 ideas. There's a lot more in the Rule of 50 or in other parts of our online resource guides. But besides the initial thank you, you may follow up and ask, tell them that you took the advice that they gave. Just a natural update. Quick email. Hey, thanks so much for suggesting that I reach out to Joe Schmo. Followed up with Joe. Such a great conversation that we had. Maybe it's other natural updates that you offer. Hey, just wrapped up my 7-week course or my semester course. Now I'm getting ready to take these new courses. Just wanted to say thanks again for our time this summer. Maybe you turn them into a mentor, or you find something that's relevant for you to share back, or just naturally saying hello. There's lots of different things that you could do to keep that relationship warm. In the 20-minute or the 2-hour job search book, they would recommend, or Steve Dalton would recommend, following up once a month until you found a job. In the 20-minute networking meeting, there's other strategies there, but find something that works for you as far as how often to follow up, but have a system in mind for following up. Okay. So timing of networking for fall recruitment. So the timing of networking for fall recruitment, sometimes referred to as OCR, on-campus recruitment, is we recommend that throughout the spring and summer that you network as much as possible. It may be that you ramp up your networking as you get closer to September 1st, but really that you really increase your networking as you have time so that you have relationships established so that when the job postings for fall recruitment, or if you're not doing fall recruitment, anytime jobs are posted, that you have those relationships already established so that you're circling back to those people as an established relationship. Say, hey, I saw the job that I've been waiting for finally posted. Would you have an additional 15 minutes to chat about that specific role, that specific hiring manager? or any other insights you may have for the interview or application process. It's reaching back out to a friend or a colleague rather than reaching out to a stranger at that point. So networking throughout the spring and summer to gear up for fall recruitment. Um, if you're going to be interviewing for an internship through fall recruitment, those usually are more of a winter recruitment. Starts after MEA here in Minnesota, end of October might be the earliest, but really is heaviest. Those interviews are going to be into January and February of the new year. So throughout the application, you want to be networking. So before applying, before interviewing, you may also want to, before you negotiate and accept, you may have a networking conversation with someone to get a sense of what their offers and network or a negotiation process were like. There's always time to be networking. It's always recommended before you actually need it. And there's one book, I'm kind of on the fence about this. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here, but reading this whole book, I don't think is necessary. But what I do like about it is it gives you an idea of all the different ways you could possibly be networking. Okay, throughout the slides, there are a lot of hidden slides. So when you have the chance to open up this entire document, you can see all of these bonus hidden content on positioning statements, samples, um, tips on building your network for international students, other best practices for networking, what to avoid, what not to say and do, common mistakes, and also a checklist for networking. Okay, so the final portion of this presentation today is about goal setting and action planning. And the reason I have this as part of this networking video is to really encourage you to set a goal, set some tangible action, thinking SMART goals, and start moving forward with your networking plan. So one of the first and most important things is to know yourself. Make sure you know what you want to talk about. And so our personal branding activities through the Greenlight program, as well as other personal reflections, will help you to know things like your interests and goals, your strengths and values, your experiences and achievement. You want to be thinking about how you communicate and polish your communication. You want it to be professional, polished, and succinct. And you also want your style that you're showing up with in these networking meetings as authentic to you, but also aligned with not only yourself and the role that you're going for. So really on brand in all communications. So in the 20-minute networking meeting book, and this example is pulled specifically from the graduate edition, so it might look a little different in other editions of the 20-minute networking meeting book. But this readiness exercise, I think, can be a really good set of questions to ask yourself before you're ready to dive into networking. Now, I wouldn't say you have to be perfect in any of these topics before you jump in networking, but you also, if you have someone that you're going to network with at your core company, you also want to be a little bit more polished than just going in super raw into that. So here are some questions that you could ask yourself. You can pause the video or write these down or make a copy of this page in the appendix of the book. But the readiness exercise is going to ask things like, what aspects of your work are you really, really good at? So ask yourself that and write these out. What personality traits do you bring to the workplace? Writing out those traits that you have. Or asking a colleague, what do they think when they ask these about you? Uh, what areas of specific expertise do you have that others don't? What makes you you? What else makes you a unique job candidate coming out of school? Complete the following sentence. An organization would be fortunate to have me join them as a maybe consultant, marketing manager, analyst, data scientist, accountant, HR generalist. Respond to the following sentence. Even though the above is true, I am still working on developing myself in the following areas. And then these last two are yes, no's. I am highly confident and ready going into my job search. I have the resources to make my job search a great experience. So One point here is the authors do suggest taking a 10-minute break after you've written out these answers and then go back and read them. And do they reflect how you really think and feel? And if they don't, then you can tweak them. So planning, committing to a plan, and following through is the rest of this. So we recommend that you have about 15 target companies and 2 contacts at least at each company. You don't need to go way over 2, but if the 2 don't get back to you, then you maybe move on. But this is our general rule of thumb. In the 2-Hour Job Search book that I've referenced a few times now, they actually recommend starting with a list of 40 companies, but before finding contacts at each of those companies, filtering down to your top 10 companies, and then finding 2 contacts at each of those companies. So it's slightly different than this recommendation that we have. And in the book itself, actually, it only says 5 companies. However, as I've corresponded with the author, Steve Dalton, over email, saying what's changed since the pandemic, he'd say that he'd now recommend that your lamp list, as they call it in that book, have 10 companies. So think for a second, how many companies are right now on your list? Do you have at least 10 companies, if not 15? And how many contacts do you currently have at those companies? And you may be starting from scratch, and that's totally fine. But you want to start building out that company list and then building contacts, and we can help with that. So if you think about why you're going to need extra contacts, is the author Steve Dalton in his book, and this outline here is similar, but not exactly from that book, is you're not going to have a 100% success rate on reaching out to contacts. You may, over time, email 10 different contacts at a company, and you may get 5 responses from those. But some of those responses maybe, no, I can't meet now or later, or I'm not the right fit for you. And out of those responses, you actually may get 3 appointments set, but you may only get 2 people that actually follow through with those meetings. Now, do you need to do 2 meetings at every company? No, but you may have companies that you do multiple. We know that some companies, like consulting firms, really want to know how many people you've networked with. And so it's important that you do as many networking meetings at some of those campus recruitment opportunities. That's not as important for direct job searches. The typical see a job online, network for it, and apply. But it is important that you have at least one contact at all the companies that you're applying to, because that can really help with the application and the interview process. So the key point here is you may contact a lot of people, but just know your success rate is only going to be probably 10 to 20% on responses and setting meetings. So keep in mind that you want to have a targeted list. You want to get those contacts at each of the lists. And so you can pause this video and look at these prompts and these questions. But we really want you to create SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals for your networking. So when you're going to do it, how many contacts at each company, and then start working your plan. And with that, that concludes this networking presentation.